We're getting there. Good afternoon, everybody. It is Angie Atkinson, and I'm here with the lovely and talented Dana Morningstar, as always, on Tuesday afternoons. Good morning, Dad. Good afternoon, Dana. How are you?
I am fantastic. How are you doing?
I cannot complain. I had a headache earlier this morning, and it just like relieved me right before this started, which is good.
That is good.
Yes. So I know we always like to start off with kind of something to chew on a little bit, something to think about. And I read this article on Psychology Today that I thought was really interesting. Excuse me, I got a little something going on. Anyway, the article is interesting because it talks about the gullibility of a narcissist. And I find this really interesting because in my experience, where I see them being gullible is the more you praise them and the more you make them think something was, their idea or their concept, or that they're really good at stuff. That's where you can kind of almost manipulate them at times. And I think that's essentially what this is saying. I mean, in a lot of scientific terms, basically because they have the patterns of grandiosity in both their fantasies and their behaviors, and the need for admiration and the lack of empathy. They don't always catch that you're not being real with them sometimes. They can sort of, this is kind of where their Achilles heel is. What do you think about that concept?
I think it's very right on. I was talking to somebody earlier today. There was a concept somebody had mentioned a while ago they called it dumb like a fox. And it had to do with like relating to narcissists and exactly what you're talking about. So like if a person's trying to get out of the relationship and they feel like no contact is going to put them in danger, but they feel like they can't be assertive because that's going to cause a narcissistic injury, that they can just kind of, and it's really playing smart like a fox, because what they're doing is they're making them leaving either like their fault or like their therapist's fault, but not the narcissist's fault. And they're saying, oh, you know what? There's so much right about you. It's just my therapist really thinks I shouldn't date, or I'm just not ready. And they're kind of allowing that narcissist to keep their ego intact in order to avoid a narcissistic injury. So I think there's a lot to it. What do you think about all that?
I definitely think there's something to it. And, in fact, one of the videos that people have both loved and hated, my most hated video is about basically how to kind of tap into those vulnerabilities. A lot of people hate it. A lot of people were mad at me for making it. And to be fair, it was a little tongue in cheek, and that might be why they hated it. But a lot of people loved it. And as Rebecca Dolly says here in the chat, she says, narcissists are totally gullible in the honeymoon period. I think their arrogance makes them believe that no one would dare mislead them. And I think there's something to that. I do. I do. I think it's the arrogance, and it's also just the kind of lack of, like you said, good stuff. Anyway, I thought that was fascinating. And I also think it's interesting on that same kind of token that people will kind of, I don't know if it's the same token, but people will kind of, one of the questions that I've heard recently, and one of the questions that I'm kind of floored by, is how do you tell the difference between a narcissist who is abusing you and a regular abuser? Now, first of all, I think you and I are on the same page on this. Like, what does it matter if they're toxic to your life? Get out, right?
Right.
I mean, but I think the point is, somebody asked because they wanted to know why would we label some, or how do we label them differently, I guess. So is if they're only physically abusing you, are they just an abuser and not a narcissist? If they apologize, are they just an abuser and not a narcissist? I don't think any of it's relevant. I think it doesn't matter. I think the label, as we've talked about before, is unimportant. Do you think there's such a thing as a regular abuser, and does it matter if there is?
No, I think they're all personality disordered.
Yeah, I think you have to be.
Like the definition of a personality disorder, it's it's pervasive, problematic behavior that negatively impacts either a person's life or the life of those around them, whether they realize it or not. If a person has such problematic behavior that it's causing PTSD in other people, and they feel entitled and justified to be able to treat people in such a horrific way, to me, that's like flat out, hands down, personality disordered. I think the challenge with this is the mental health community, and a person could also be, there's some sort of cognitive thing going on, whether that person's mentally ill and untreated, or they're personality disordered, or they have some sort of brain injury that's impacting the behavior centers of their brain. Yeah. It's a quote unquote normal person doesn't have traumatizing behaviors to others. And I kind of like we were talking about in that last interview with Tracy, I really think the mental health community, the way that they understand narcissism, it's in a more, definitely more overt way. So it's, kind of the grandiosity of like Donald Trump, or like Kanye West, just kind of this really over the top kind of thing. And the dynamics of abuse aren't really taken into play. Right. Or into consideration, but I feel like they really should be, because that's where you really see that level of like entitlement and delusion and emotional immaturity. And that's where all of that stuff comes out. I don't know. I think the mental health field is on kind of this is like really cutting edge stuff, kind of making these connections. And here real quick, here's a realization I had the other night after that last interview we did, was about why this is so confused with mental health professionals. And I think it's because like with narcissists and sociopaths, so like what we would see working in the mental health field is you'd have a person come in that maybe we knew had a history of like exploitation, or criminal activity against others, like being a child molester or stealing or both. And so they would get the diagnosis of like antisocial personality disorder. But in hindsight being what it is, I think it was still understood of like, okay, they had these certain behaviors that made them antisocial. But I still don't, there's only one therapist really that I've worked with who I think understood the pervasiveness of antisocial personality disorder. Because before, the other therapist that I worked with, it was very much like, well, because they stole or because they molested children, that's the antisocial personality part. But then they're normal in every other context. They're just a little bit manipulative. Right. I think until you go through this and you see the level of manipulation, which a normal person, unless you're on the receiving end of it, I just don't know if anybody could even begin to wrap their mind around it. Yeah. Yeah. So
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's part of the reason that people need people like us who have been there and who are, I'm sorry about all this noise, who have been there and who are willing to talk about it, And another thing that I find really, really interesting is that, I'm going to just turn the sound down on my phone really quickly. There we go. Is that, I think, okay, I just want to roll back really quick. When we talked about all abusers being personality disordered, I think what do you say to somebody who says, well, mom didn't know better because she was raised in a household where she was also physically punished and they abused her too. So she was just doing what she knew. And she did, she loved us and that's what she said and da, 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 da. So what do you say about somebody who suffers from what you might consider like physical abuse, but obviously in the extreme, not just physical punishment, because that was what they had always seen and always known. Isn't it the same thing? Don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, personality disorders are, kind of a nature plus nurture kind of a thing. And so trauma tends to beget more trauma. And if a person grows up in a den of dysfunction, there's a really solid chance that they're going to continue those behaviors. And that's kind of goes back to the whole like breaking the cycle of abuse is but the challenge with getting through to dangerous and destructive people like that is they're really emotionally immature. And so it's like trying to get through to a kind of a damaged 6-year-old, really, and their level of entitlement, the justification. They just have, they think they have because they have a reason. We all have reasons for what we do. And so they think, well, because you cut me off in traffic, that's why I rear-ended your car.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And it's sort of like, okay, I can see why you're frustrated that happened, but normal, more emotionally mature people, there has to be a line, but for them, there is no containment. It's just very impulsive. It's very, just whatever they want to do. And they're very driven by their emotions and in their wants. And it's really hard. And most people don't take constructive criticism well, right? Sure. Anyhow. Sure. And then you've got a person that just feels so justified and entitled, and they don't understand boundaries and or respect or empathy for other people. It's just really difficult to get through to that. Yeah. To that. So, and then not only that too, but like if you've got somebody that maybe picked up along the way, maybe they didn't have a bad childhood. Maybe they just picked up along the way that, hey, it's really easy for me to get my needs met if I just lie.
Great point. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's been quite a few. I've been on this kick of watching these like crime stories on YouTube. And it's amazing to me how many of these people have murdered like their spouse or whoever, and their family is just horrified. They're like, we had a normal childhood. Like, we don't know, this person decided to murder both of their parents, or they decided to murder their spouse, or they did these horrible crimes. And there's a few people, even that I've encountered in my own life, that have been like incredibly just psychopathic with their behavior. And I really do think it's just been that somewhere along the line, they realized, boy, people sure are suckers if I can just tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Or pretend to be what they want me to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, we could go so deep into that. We won't go so deep today, but I totally think that that's, I know people in my own life who were raised in places where they were loved and treated with respect and everything else. And then they still came out in some pretty shocking ways. And so I think it just does depend on a lot of factors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's see here. We have
actually, let me go back real quick to that question. You're saying the gal was asked, kind of wanting the difference between like a narcissistic abuser and like a regular abuser.
Yeah.
And I think that trying to navigate that is something that pretty much everybody first struggles with when they start finding these, our kinds of channels of. And I think to me, the what's concerning about that is the deeper question I almost wonder is, are they really asking, can this person change? Because they're like, well, I heard if narcissists don't change, but what if they're not a narcissist? Like, what if they cry, or what if they apologize, or what if they're really good to their dog? Like, if they're not a narcissist, does this mean that they can actually change? And like you were saying, potato, it's all types of poison are still going to kill you.
Yeah.
Or still dangerous to you.
That's totally how I feel. And I thought about, creating like a whole video around it, but I thought, the answer is really simple. Sure, I can give you some ideas of here's what NPD is and here's what it isn't, but it's irrelevant, because if you're being abused, you're being abused. And the person is, and I'm not laughing at that. To me, it was so simple, but again, it's so much easier to see it when you're not in the middle of it.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's go to the chat, shall we?
Yes.
We have Jesse Brown, Magenta, Jenny Moore, Misty Dawn. Hello. Up yours, Narc 66. What's up? Marla. Hello, Marla. Jenny Girl, LJ, Luna, Mickey, Shastina. Hello. Jody, Rebecca, Marla. Oh, we have a great group today. Okay. Mari is here. Okay. And we have Ilja from Ireland. What's up, sister? Okay. Hope Bradford says, I would like to ask how do you handle adult children with these behaviors that line up with NPD? And I think that's a really great question. I would start by saying this. I only have one adult child, and he just became an adult a minute ago, to be fair. With that being said, I think that the best thing you can do is to gray rock the drama and the BS. And if you can stand to be, if they're not directly abusing you, then you can just kind of gray rock the drama and the BS and just kind of keep a little bit of space, but still maintain contact. Now, if they are directly abusing you, then I would treat them like any other narcissist. Unfortunately, when they become adults, they make their choices, and then you have to make your choice. Either way, you don't tolerate abuse. Dana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think absolutely. It's, our boundaries, our deal breakers, and our standards, if we can get those to apply to other adults universally, your life will start to change. And I see a lot of people who really do get dragged through hell by other family members because they're like, well, but this is my adult child, or this is my mother, or this is, my neighbor or my pastor or what have you. And it doesn't matter. It's your boundaries are your boundaries. And a person, just because you gave birth to them, doesn't mean that they can treat you like garbage.
Right.
So, Yeah.
I am totally with you on that.
And I had a question here. Let's see. And this is a common one here, Angie. It's from Anne, who asks, can a narcissist change? My narcissist has many good qualities. Is that normal?
I mean, I think there's a spectrum of narcissism. There are those who just are a little selfish all the way over to psychopathic and sociopathic, and everything in between. But I think that it depends on what are the bad qualities of the narcissist. No, I don't think narcissists can change. No, let me take that back. They can. I think there's a possibility that they could, if they chose to dig deep, find that inner, core wound and really work through it and, properly. Maybe they would have to learn to develop empathy. There would be a lot involved, but I have never successfully seen it happen. I know, Dana, you haven't either. And I know Richard hasn't. We've had discussions about this. So I don't think it's real. I don't think they can change. And in fact, there's one guy on YouTube who says he can change narcissists. But I've spoken to two of his clients' wives, because he only deals with men, and they have both said, no, there's no change. It's just behavior modification. And if they're going to continue it, they have to keep going back all the time for the rest of their lives. And as Richard said, of course, money, of course. And the other side of that coin is they still relapse and go back into their old behaviors. And these are people who are actively working on changing. So my answer is I don't think so.
Yeah. And, I guess I would look at it. I'm a big fan of every situation that we are in. We need to always view it through the lens of our healthy boundaries, standards, and deal breakers. So if you're in a relationship or a work dynamic or a friendship or what have you with a problematic person, to get really clear about, okay, where are my deal breakers in this? Because people also get caught up in like, well, they're promising to change, or, they're saying that they want to go to therapy or what have you, to get really clear with yourself as far as, okay, what do I need to see changed? What's the time frame that I need to see these changes in, and how much time and energy and money am I willing to throw at this?
Right.
Because change is not a fast process. Even for us, even for people that struggle with learning boundaries and standards and deal breakers and all of that stuff, it's a daily challenge, and it requires a ton of ongoing introspection and oftentimes a tremendous amount of pain for us to realize what we're doing isn't working and that we need to change our approach. And so for us to even climb out of that hole of really either non-existent boundaries or ground down boundaries, and kind of this really almost unhealthy way of interacting with the world, where we put we're sinking ourselves to save other people, and we're so out of tune with our own wants and needs and feelings. It takes a long time. It can take a long time for a person to get back in alignment with themselves and we're actually highly motivated to make our lives work. Whereas narcissists are not, because they're always getting their way.
Yes.
And so that's that pain level, because pain is generally the main catalyst for any of us to start wanting to change. If they don't have that, then there's no real motivation for them to change. They're changing just to get us off their back.
Yes.
But that's when they normally just get better at hiding their behavior. Or they just try to act the part until, but they can only do that for so long because it's not true change. So I would just encourage you, get clear at where's your line in the sand. And if you are thinking about leaving, then that way, when, okay, I've exhausted everything and the things that I wanted to try, these are my deal breakers. And now I'm ready to walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as Richard talks about taking the chocolate, like staying and taking whatever it is that you find to be valuable from the narcissist or whatever. And if you do that, then you've got to deal with the rest of it, because some of them will be really well behaved for weeks at a time, and then they go back to narc mode or whatever. But regardless, they don't change. They might modify behavior, like Dana said, to get you off their back. But as soon as they know they've got their claws firmly entrenched again, they're going to go back to what's comfortable for them, just like everybody does, on some level. Yeah. Yeah. I want to say really quickly, Brookdale, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate you. I don't see a question from you, but I will continue to look for one. Okay.
Here's a great comment from Healthy Love, who says, even in relationship with two healthy people, counting on the other person to change means that you are not in the right relationship. We are not supposed to expect each other to change. I agree. I think, there's certain things, like if you're in the right relationship, it's about getting in tune with your partner. And that kind of tends to just happen naturally over time. And then with both people being assertive and saying, hey, this, working towards compromise. And there's that joining where you become a team. If we're dating somebody and we're like, boy, they would be such a great partner if they would only quit using drugs, sober up, lose 100 pounds, quit yelling at me, and treat me with respect. And it's like, that's not a partner, that's a project.
Exactly.
And odds are they're not going to want to be fixed, and they're just going to resent you, and you're going to wear yourself out trying to do it.
Yeah. And I think as empaths, a lot of times we want to help people, maybe not the 100 pounds thing, but all the rest of this stuff, if they would just feel better about themselves, maybe none of this stuff would be a problem or whatever. I remember being in relationships, meeting people, and I guess coverts maybe in some cases, and they would come to me with this, I'm so not good enough attitude. And of course, the first thing I wanted to do was raise them right up and teach them that they were good enough and they could do this. And then they used that against me in so many cases. And so that was true in both romantic relationships as well as friendships. It became I became a quick supply for a lot of people. I learned, but it took a long time. So, yeah. And I think that's it. And in many cases, it wasn't about any sort of lack in myself. It was really, truly a desire to help that person, and it became so twisted. It was crazy. Anyway,
that was a pattern that I also ran for decades, and I didn't realize. I guess I had like inklings that it was problematic, but my desire to help was sincere. But then I kind of realized, I'm like, I had this more so, I think, with friends in my life than I did with, I'm sure it was there with men as well, but it sticks out more in my mind with some friends in my life. And I found myself continually playing the role of like therapist or caregiver or teacher, and which inadvertently created this very uneven dynamic. And then the result of that, and I would have my feelings hurt continually, because if they wanted, that was how they looked at me, as almost not really as a friend, but as somebody to call when they needed help. But if they wanted to go out and have fun, they would go out with their other friends.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, man, what's so wrong with me? Like, why, why do they only come around when they need help or they're feeling really low? And for years, I thought that was almost a good thing. Like, I'm the true friend. I'm the one that they really call in the middle of the night when they're having an a breakdown. But it was like, no, we had this very unhealthy kind of codependent dynamic where they needed me, and I didn't need to be needed, but I felt most comfortable when I was needed.
Yeah.
And then when I realized that of like, this is not healthy, if I only can relate to people if they need me, then people are going to continue to cycle out of my life when they get all better, because we're not bonding on a equal, relatable way. We're bonding over their crisis.
Yeah. And what would happen in those cases when you needed some help? Did those
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that was, yeah, same deal.
Yeah.
Been there. Okay. We won't call them the B word. We'll just move on. All right. Ooh, yeah, I can totally relate. Dandelion Green says, when I'm asking my ex-narcissist for advice about anything, that was the best way to get a response, a nice response, or to get him to come out of his silence, was ask him for advice. That's interesting. And I think that makes sense based on what we talked about earlier, because certainly it's, hey, you know more than me. Can I know the answer? That's a bright move on her part. Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And here's a comment from Pam, who I think is right on. She says, don't beat yourself up for trying to help and be a good person, just strengthen boundaries.
Yes.
I would agree. And so there was a step in kind of my own evolution with boundaries and relating to other people, where I went from really overgiving of like my time and my energy and feeling the need to help, like continually help. And then I kind of woke up to that, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like these people in my life that I was considering them to be, not all of them, but like, there had been some significant friendships that were very one-sided. And when I realized that, then I swung really far the other way and just began cutting people off right and left, because I just felt really used and almost exploited.
Sure.
Like it just made me feel gross. And then now I'm kind of like Goldilocks. I'm kind of getting right in the middle there, where it's like, okay, now I'm really trying to embrace that open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication of bringing things up and saying, hey, you know what? Like this hurt my feelings, or I would really like to spend time with you. Let's go to a paint your own pottery thing, or like, let's do some other stuff. My concern is that we're only bonding over chaos or crisis. And I really enjoy you, and I'd like to like expand the dimensions of our friendship.
Yeah.
And just be more assertive about that. So I guess this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is change takes time. And it's this, I think everybody that goes through any type of process with change, whatever it might be, it takes a little while to get your sea legs.
Yeah.
And figure out like what works and what doesn't work and what you need to adjust.
Yeah. And along that same line, now that you do what you do, maybe this has happened to you, maybe it hasn't. What has happened to me more than once is people will bring me someone in their lives who has, is suffering with something similar or something like narcissistic abuse. And they will want me to help that person like at inappropriate times, like at a party.
Oh.
A barbecue in my backyard or whatever. And I just kind of, it's a boundary issue. And so, I'll try to be polite for a minute, but then eventually I just have to say, listen, I'm off work right now. So, and it's not that I don't love what I do. It's just that sometimes I need to think about something else for a minute, but I feel like it's a similar deal, a boundary. And I know that these people mean well, who are bringing me these people, but I can't just always be on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes I just want to be Angie and not Angie Atkinson. You know what I mean?
Totally.
I
have business cards.
I do too.
And so even though I don't really have a business, like I just have like my website and like, I mean, you do, but I don't, but I got those for that reason, because it's amazing when people find out what you do and they're like, oh my goodness, you're totally describing my mother or my ex-husband or my, and people they do want to have these in-depth conversations. And it's such a big topic that it would really monopolize the rest of the evening. And so, yeah, I give people a card and I'm like, here's my site. I've got resources on there. Like just start there. And then
I've been doing the same thing.
Support
actually.
Groups and
yeah. Which is a good thing, but it's hard when someone, like, for example, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail for obvious reasons, but one of my children had a friend a while ago who her mother wanted to meet me, and that was okay with me. And then we met, and then we seemed like we hit it off like that. And then she came over one time on the, with the idea of we were going to hang out and have a couple of glasses of wine and whatever. And I thought, yay, a mom friend. And then she was really sneaking over here to ask me for advice. It really hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
It really did, because I thought, oh, we were friends, and I didn't even really talk about what I did. You know what I mean? She already knew, though. And so that kind of shocked and hurt me a little bit. But I guess my point is, wrapping back around to the main point here, was that I had to set a boundary. And I did. I passed out a business card, and I, ended the session, which, but yeah. That's something that I deal with now. I didn't deal with before. I did deal with people always wanting the advice and the help and all that as well. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Doreen B said she watched a movie last night with a lot of narcissistic behavior called Acrimony. Have you seen that?
I have not, but I've heard, I'm going to write it down and I'm going to watch it for next week. I've heard a lot of people mention it. Have you seen it?
I have not, but I'm definitely going to look for it because I've heard it mentioned as well. Let me see if I can put it somewhere I won't lose it. I do have my little, I'll just write it. Okay. I'll just paste it for now. Okay. I have not seen that, Doreen, but we'll both watch it for next week.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Oops. All right.
And
thank you, Doreen. Doreen said, we're glad you're Angie Atkinson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, we are.
All right, let's see here.
Here's a comment from Healthy Love who's talking about change. And she says, don't try to change a fish into a bird and try to teach it to fly. There are limits to change.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true.
Yeah, absolutely. Change is a difficult but necessary evil. It's not evil, it's good. But yeah. But the thing about change is that I think you shouldn't put a lid on what you're capable of, but you should be aware of how much can be accomplished in how much time. Like if you want to lose 100 pounds, it is not going to happen in a week. You know what I mean? And at the same token, if you're currently in the middle of an embroiled, crazy and meshed mess of a narcissistic relationship, it might take you more than a week to get out of it, to get healed and get out, so I think that's a good point. Okay, so Magenta says, Angie and Dana, I'm pumped on creating boundaries, but I really struggle with keeping my cool in the heat of the moment. Any advice or tricks? That is a great question. I will let you start, Dana, because I know you're pretty good about this kind of stuff. Go ahead.
Okay. I guess my question would be, do you tend to lose your cool all the time, or is it just with certain people, or is it just with certain topics? I think the more insight that you can have as far as what are some hot buttons for you, and if you've got a certain person that tends to push those buttons, it can, I guess, what's worked for me is to realize, to be honest with yourself, like to really, we were talking about earlier, like that open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication with other people, but we need to have that with ourselves too. And it can be hard to get out of denial and out of this misplaced hope that they're going to be something other than they are. And so if you have this, whoever it is, friend, parent, partner in your life, where they're continually on you about something, or they're kind of pushing buttons about something, to prepare yourself emotionally of that they continually tend to push these buttons. This is the dance that we do. They kind of start pushing these buttons, and then I start defending myself, and then they keep going, or they'll play stupid, or they'll keep trying to. They basically keep pushing buttons, and then you eventually explode. If that's the dance, and that's been the dance, to realize this is the dance. The only way to break free from it is to see it for what it is. And so when they start at you, let's say they're talking to you about your weight or something. And I don't know, just being like these little subtle put downs, like little snarky comments, little things like that. Realizing that, okay, you can change the subject. You can, get busy, leave and go to the bathroom. I'm a big fan of, if you are having a hard time in the moment, calming down and handling it, give yourself some space, go to the bathroom.
It's a good pattern interrupt too. For your brain.
For real. And so then that way you can just decompress, wash your hands, like just breathe, get centered. And then if you have to go back, I mean, if this is like a relative at Thanksgiving dinner, right? Or like you can't easily leave, go back and then just change the topic. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to sit there and defend yourself and just be attacked like that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you covered that one. I think you pretty much covered it.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Let's move on. Okay. Do you have another one for us?
No, but I'm looking.
Okay. While you're looking, Still Pearl says, I still feel like narcissists seem to defend, I feel like therapists seem to defend covert narcissists. Yes, I've seen it. Dana's seen it. I see that a lot. And that's part of the reason I do what I do and Dana does what she does, because we're trying to educate not only our fellow survivors, but also professionals. And I've had myself as clients, I've had therapists, psychologists, one psychiatrist, and several people who are going to school to be psychologists, thankfully, because some people are learning in the field. But yeah, it happens all the time because, as Dana was talking about before, they aren't as, it's a hard topic to understand if you haven't experienced it. And go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to hear what you have to say. You're more educated about that.
It just frustrates me. I get so worked up about stuff. Yeah, I think unless a person's on the receiving end of it, they just don't see it. And so many mental health professionals, first of all, abuse really is not taught in any mental health field. A person has to really do like an internship somewhere at like a domestic violence center in order to even learn about this. What they do learn about personality disorders is grossly inadequate. I used to sit in, when I was working as a psychiatric nurse, we had team meetings for 2 hours twice a week. And I did this for 3 years at that one place. And it just about made me cry out of frustration after every single meeting. So I'm like, you guys, they just don't see it. And it truly is this mentality of like, well, they're baby birds with broken wings, and we'll just work with them on cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy and, just coping skills. And they're just broken, and compassion, and just all kinds of like really awful boundaries. I think there's a ton of people in the mental health field, especially therapists and social workers, who get in there and they have a ton of their own unexamined codependency issues and their own self-esteem tied up with being like people pleasing and peacemaking and fixing other people. And they don't even realize it because this stuff is not codependency. This kind of stuff is really not taught. And it's many unintentional damage tends to come out of that because they're seeing it through the worldview that most people have of, well, but that's your mother and family's forever. And, she's not getting any younger, or she didn't really mean it. That's how she grew up. Or you should be more compassionate. Or have you tried understanding his love languages?
Oh boy.
Right? Like, have you
started on that one?
Have you tried twisting yourself into a different form of emotional pretzel?
Yeah,
like,
please.
A marriage retreat. You just really need to triple up your effort on saving your marriage. And there's just, to me, the level of negligence in that field is just, it's unacceptable.
Now this is interesting because I went to a therapist with my ex one time, and the therapist, when we walked in, I sat down, he sat down, we told our story. At the end of this, he looks at this guy and he says, "You're not good enough for her." And he looks at me and he says, "You need to leave him." And of course I thought that was great, but he didn't like it at all and freaked out. And then we had to leave and never go back. And they were cussing at each other by the time we left the office. So that was not a smart move. I mean, he obviously knew that the guy was toxic and not good enough for me at that time, which sounds really narcissistic to say, but it was him who said it, not me. But he said he didn't know how to deal with that person, because you never ever tell somebody you're not good enough for her. It was the Gestalt type therapy, which for anyone listening who is a therapist, don't try that on a narcissist. Okay.
Yeah.
Right along. We found another one and he ended up being a little better, but still coddling the narcissist a lot. So
yeah. Yeah. And I think too, the added challenge with, the mental health field is if a person comes in and they're describing their partner. I think this is one of the main reasons personality disorders are kind of like not really brought up by mental health professionals, is because it can be seen as like pathologizing their partner. And like, I think it just goes back to this idea of like relationships take two, and any relationship issues are shared issues. And, that's not the case when there's abuse involved. It's the manipulation just takes over, and it's like we've talked about before, it's more like a cult dynamic than a relationship dynamic. And it really requires people that are super familiar with abuse, because even if you are familiar with abuse and the dynamics at play, it can be such a minefield kind of when you're dealing with the target. And I mean, there are many times where even I've had like the best of intentions and you just say one thing the wrong way, or you say something that they're not ready to hear. And I was the same way when I was back then too, where targets become so reactive and defensive, and then they just shut down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just so many challenges to overcome. It's incredibly difficult.
Yeah. Consistently. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dandelion Greens adds, that's why going into therapy with a narcissist is risky and potentially re-victimizing. Of course. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of therapists think that narcissists will never, it's the same kind of like normal mentality. They'll never admit that they're wrong. They'll never cry. They think in absolutes.
Yes.
Narcissists, it's funny because, there's this whole kind of desire to avoid black and white thinking, but I think it's hard for people to not fall into that. And I see it with therapists too. It's like, well, but he really loves his dog, and it's like, there's
the dog exists to make the narcissist happy.
It's like, right. It's like this whole spectrum. I'm just saying all this stuff out of frustration. I mean, there's definitely some amazing therapists out there that are worth their weight in gold. It can just be difficult to find them. I think there's more damaging ones out there than there are good ones. And it can just take a person a few times of going to a few different ones to really find one that really truly gets you. And but yeah, I mean, it's narcissism and sociopathy comes across in like a wide variety of ways. I mean, some of them are married. I mean, Bill Cosby, right? Married, seemed like world's greatest guy. And then, after 7:00 at night, he's out drugging and raping women. So like if he'd gone into a therapist's office, he would have come across as like the world's greatest guy. And boy, his wife must have some sort of like, commitment issues to ever have an issue with him, or boy, she sure is paranoid, or it's unfounded because of how well he presented himself. And that's the thing. I just don't think normal, decent people can even fathom all of the different forms that evil can come in.
Totally. It's a really great example because, if you really think about Bill Cosby, until just when all of this popped out about him, which I know wasn't that recent, but it was not that long ago. We all thought, he was America's dad, and he'd been married for 150 years or whatever. He looked like the perfect guy on so many levels. And then to find this out, and there were a lot of, when all this Me Too stuff happened, a lot of people that I was like horribly disappointed by.
Oh yeah.
that's a really interesting, that's a great example of, because that's totally the truth. If Bill Cosby went to a therapist, he would be, for all intents and purposes, if they didn't know his history, even if they didn't ever meet him once, he seemed like a great guy. He could just act like Cliff Huxtable and be fine.
Mhm.
That's crazy.
Yep. That tripped me up for a long time. When I first stumbled across like sociopathy and like really understanding this kind of stuff, because both of the sociopaths in my life were incredibly charming, seemed like world's greatest guys. People loved them. Like they were the kind of guys that would shovel your driveway in the winter and would always be there for you and were so great, but they lived double lives and just, couldn't tell the truth to save their life.
Yeah.
And it was just really difficult for normal people to wrap their mind around, because I think normal people think that abusive, dangerous people look like Charles Manson.
Yeah.
Or like a Columbine shooter.
Yeah.
Like they don't all look like that.
And they certainly aren't the guy that comes over and shovels a driveway when it snows. I mean, right. And now this is right along the same lines. Marla says her and her 17-year-old daughter both have PTSD after her ex-husband, narcissist. Her daughter spent 3 weeks in treatment for it. But then she says her whole family is treating her now like she's making it up for attention. Okay. So obviously there's some toxicity, I would think, in that situation with the family, but even nice, decent people sometimes are going to, okay, Brooke, we're going to get you next. Hold on. Even nice, decent people in many cases are going to, kind of roll their eyes if they've heard about it enough and they don't fully understand. And, people who might otherwise think, oh, that's terrible what you went through. But then, when it's 3 months, 3 years, whatever later, and you're still having issues, they might think, okay, I think it's about attention, but they just don't know. So my advice is always to do your very best to try to keep your healing parts, the parts where you're having to talk about the disorder and what people have done to you and things like that. I try to keep those in survivor circles or with people who understand, at least. Whether you come here to talk about it, or you go to SPAN, or you do coaching, or you go to Dana's group, Thrive After Abuse, whatever you do, even there are some in-person groups you can be involved with, or go get a counselor or a therapist who understands. But whatever you do, you try not to, and this sounds weird, and maybe I'm off base here, but I try not to talk about it to people who won't understand it. That's just generally how I am about everything. But Dana, what are your thoughts on that?
100%. I remember like back when I was first really going through all this, and I remember I kept thinking, I'm like, I feel like I have PTSD, but I thought like that can't be right. Like PTSD is caused by like war.
Right.
Or being held captive. Like Elizabeth Smart probably has PTSD, but like not me. And even then I still, there were times, what was that movie? Like Unbroken, I think it was, where the guy was a POW. Did you ever see that movie?
I might have.
It was fantastic. It was just kind of about like the triumph of the human spirit. Anyways, at the end of it, it talked about he finally was set free. And after all, his like plane had crashed, and then he was lost at sea. And then all these people in his boat got eaten by sharks. And then he got rescued by, I think it was like the Japanese, and then taken to a POW. This is a true story. Wow. And so he'd survived all of these like near-death experiences, and then to be horrifically physically abused on a daily basis for years. And then at the end of the movie, it said that, he had struggled with PTSD. And I remember being so sad by that, because I'm like, oh my goodness, this guy goes through so much, and then it still keeps going. And I remember thinking, kind of like, almost like how interesting. I was shocked in some way, I think, that he had PTSD. Like it just didn't click. And then knowing what you know now, you're like, of course he does. Like, how could anybody go through that and not have PTSD, right? Or like people like survivors of the Holocaust, when you realize, they probably all had PTSD. But in my mind, when I thought about trauma like that, even extreme trauma like that, it was like, oh no, or even slaves, right? Like, oh no, now they're free. And they just get back into society and like life is good. It was just this very ignorant, naive mentality about understanding the effects of trauma. And so now understanding PTSD and how people are resilient, but they're also incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
And anything can cause PTSD. Being in a really bad car accident, almost being in a house fire, almost dying in a house fire, having your house burglarized, even if you're not home.
Happened to me. Still sleep with the TV on because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think a lot of people, when they're like, oh yeah, okay, you got PTSD from this, they're most likely thinking like that of, oh, PTSD happens after like horrific, combat. And but it's the same mentality too of, oh, physical abuse is really abuse. Right. Everything else is just relationship issues and just you kind of being a delicate little flower.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the worst part of it is that, oh, you're such a delicate little flower. That kind of like, it feels very insulting to someone who has survived what you have survived, I'm guessing, my friend, Marla. But I'm totally, we can explain all day, but I think what it comes down to is if your family can't handle it, I would just talk to people who can and move forward with them if you want to. If they're toxic themselves, you have some other things to think about. But if it's just a matter of they don't understand and so they're not handling it, then I go back to my original point. And I think Dana's made some really great points here as well. I want to really quickly, Dana, I'm sorry to do like 2 in a row here, but
go for it.
Brookdale donated to the super chat, and she says, I've been no contact for 2 weeks. A lawyer wants me to take the police and get my stuff. Means seeing my narcissist husband help. Do it. Take a friend with you. Make sure the friend stands between you and the ex. My bet is, or my suggestion is, do not look this person in the eyes the whole time you're there, even if they're staring at you walking around the whole time. The police will make that person stand outside your house in most states while you go in and get your stuff. And I would say, go in strong, make sure if you have like anyone that you trust to go with you, bring that person, whether it's bigger, a big giant man or a small little woman, it doesn't matter. Just somebody for moral support. The police are going to be there to protect you physically. Dana, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think that's all awesome advice. The only thing I might add would be maybe you could create a playlist of like really empowering music and put in your headphones. And so you can't even hear anything that your ex is saying, and maybe get a game plan before you go in of like, this is what we're looking for. And maybe make I don't know how much stuff you have over there, but maybe make a list, because when you're going to get over there, odds are you're going to be panicked and flustered, and you want to make sure that you get all of your stuff at that time. So you're like, oh man, I forgot this, my crock pot or whatever, and have to go back. So list out everything that comes to mind right now that, yes, I for sure want to go grab all this stuff so you can check it off as you're putting it in a bag or a suitcase or whatever. Yeah.
And I absolutely, all of those are great points. I didn't even think of having I'm always about an empowering playlist.
I know you are. Yeah.
but that's a great idea. What an excellent addition to that. Thank you. That's really good. I like that.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, Brooke, let us know if you have any other questions. Dana, you got another one for us?
I had one and then I lost it.
Okay, let's see here. This is just a comment from Luna. She says, perfect topic today. People advise me to call my narcissist out, but I refuse because nobody can really control his reaction. I prefer to pretend, do a little bit of gray rock and narcissistic supply until I can leave the situation. And quite honestly, Luna, I think that's the smartest thing you can do. I really do. If you're not being physically abused. Now, if you are being physically abused, my friend, I don't think you have time to play around. I think you need to get out right now. And I just want to make that really clear to everybody here. If you are in the middle of physical abuse, there's no time to plan and there's no time to think. You just get out and then worry about the rest. Like go to a shelter if you have to, or go sleep on your friend's couch. Get the heck out or call the police and have that person arrested if they ever touch you physically. I mean, and that'll give you a little bit of time at least. And even a lot of times you can even get it to where the restraining order, so they can't even come back to the house for 90 days or whatever. And even if it's their house, something to think about. because if you've established residency, in my state, it's like 90 days. Then it doesn't matter if you're on the lease, doesn't matter if you're on the house thing. If you've established residency and they have abused you and the police are involved, the police can make that person stay away from their own house so you can live in the house for 90 days or something like that. That will give you a little bit of wiggle room and time. But Dana, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I guess the only thing I would encourage you with that is it's just going to depend on the level of danger that you feel you're in.
Yeah.
If you feel like this person is a completely unhinged and violent and they just don't care, like that a restraining order or anything's going to make it more dangerous, I would see. And here's something too about staying in domestic violence shelters. If anybody's thinking about going this route, most of them are continually at max capacity. And so it can be good to call ahead and make sure that they have a room, and then to see how long you can stay, because every single shelter is different.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Oh. Another thing is, and I don't know, it's going to obviously depend on money, but they have these extended stays. And this suggestion came from somebody a long time ago in one of my early morning chats. And I think it's a really good idea. Sometimes if you're desperate, you could go, and even if you have to bring your kids with you, you could make it fun for them, get an extended stay like suite where you have like a bed, a couch, a little table and chairs and like a little microwave or whatever, or even sometimes a whole little kitchenette. And it's, some of them are expensive, some of them are not expensive. Obviously be careful, lock the door, do all the things, but it sometimes just sleeping in a big, 1-bedroom something or other is better than any kind of physical abuse that you can get. And if you don't have a friend that you can stay with, this is an option that is not horribly expensive and where all of your stuff's going to be covered. That's going to take care of your electric bill, your water bill, your gas bill, all the things. It has cable for free, usually has internet so you can find a job, all the things. So something to think about.
Yeah. And oftentimes too, even if you're not involved with the church, but oftentimes churches can be great resources. And if you call them and say, hey, this is my situation, I'm trying to leave, I'm really trying to line up some furniture or some, I need help paying for a long-term stay motel. Do you have any resources? Could I even potentially get a loan from you guys, and I'll work to pay you back? Or,
I know that Catholic churches, especially, other churches as well, but I know specifically that Catholic churches have, and I'm not Catholic, have a lot of programs like that in place. And part of that is probably because the Catholic Church is like the largest business in the world, but I'm not complaining because I think it's great that they do this.
Yeah.
And so if you're having struggles in your life and you need some sort of help, they are very good. Now they want you to do, and here, let me just, little TMI for y'all. It's TMI Tuesday, I guess. When I was married to my ex-narcissist, was the one making money, but it was not like, I was a photographer in a studio, a portrait studio. So I wasn't like making big money, but he was the one who was making less money. So when I had to go, I had a pregnancy issue and I had to go on bed rest. We almost went under because I didn't get any sort of pay while I was not working at that time. I was much younger then. And so I ended up having to ask for help paying my electric bill. So what they did was they wanted to come to my house and they wanted to see where I lived. And they wanted to see, it was an apartment at the time. And they wanted to kind of talk to me personally about them helping me. And I think that was just to make sure I wasn't a drug addict, to be honest with you. But you might have to expect, to sit down and speak with someone about the situation. But it's going to be worth it if it helps you to get out of abuse. So I wanted to tack that on there. This was many years ago, but they did help me, and it was a Catholic church, and they do still have these programs in place. It was, so yeah.
Yeah. Good deal.
It wasn't back then, but it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
Here is a question from Annie.
Okay.
Or Anne, who says, can you guys today each give a tip that we can do on a daily basis? A simple tip.
Oh, I got one.
Okay, go for it.
Are we talking about to get healthy, right? To feel better?
She didn't clarify, but I say just go with.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you, you probably have heard me say it before, but I'll remind you, it's worth it. every day, I always tell everybody, every day, think of 10 things you're grateful for and 3 things you love about yourself. The 3 things you love about yourself, the 10 things you're grateful for is like for everybody in the world. They should all do that. 3 things you love about yourself is for us as survivors, because we so often are beat down emotionally and our self-esteem is just non-existent after we go through these relationships. So in order to sort of revive that, we vibrate better when we feel good, and we feel good when we're grateful for things. So we think of the 10 things we're grateful for, and we think of the 3 things we love about ourselves. We kind of bring ourselves back into that up space, the up vibrational space, and do that. And I also think affirmations in general are positive. Dana.
I love that. That's a great tip. I would say, kind of probably along the same lines, is to make a concerted effort every day to do something that nourishes your soul.
Yes.
And it could be, it could be something big. It could be something small. It could be taking time, like taking 5 minutes to go play with your puppy, or taking time to actually make a really nice dinner.
Yeah.
For you and your kids, or taking
even
time.
Just you.
Yeah. Or even just you, especially just when it's just us, right? I mean, my goodness, taking time to be creative in some way, or to just go get some exercise that's enjoyable, or going to bed a little bit early, or maybe staying up late and watching a movie.
Yeah.
Whatever just feels like this is nourishing. And while you're doing that, to be consciously aware that you are taking your time, this is your time. It's okay for you to carve out time for just you, and paying attention to how that feels. Because I think the more used to we get feeling good, the more aware we are of when we feel bad.
Yeah.
And so then it's like Angie was saying, you just start kind of like gravitating towards this. That just kind of brings you up to this like higher kind of vibrational level, where you just get so used to feeling good, and you're like, man, I just don't want anybody to like harsh my mellow. Right? Like, I just feel really good doing this. And then it's like it crowds out so much of the negativity. It just becomes where then we're not waffling of, should we stay? Should we go? Is this toxic? Is this healthy? Is this a problem? Is it not? Like, you get used to feeling good.
Yeah.
And then the bad stuff is just, you just easily start kind of pruning that stuff out of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I always like to tell people, and this is just to tack on to what you said, I always like to tell people that when you're going through recovery, this is the best time to start a passion project, right? Whether it is, like you said, painting or whatever, join a bowling team, whatever, figure out what excites you, what nourishes your soul, and do that. And if you don't know, try lots of things, have fun with it. I have a passion finder at queenbeing.com/passion for free. Download it if you want it. But I think that's a great tip. I love it. And I think that we should all do that every day. I said every single day I have to have 1 hour by myself, even if I'm just staring at a wall, which I never am because I can't stand that. But but I need 1 hour by myself for nobody to talk to me or touch me or be close to me. And I know that sounds weird, but that's how I refuel, as an empath or as an individual, I guess. So I need that quiet time. So I love that.
I love your concept of a passion project.
Thank you.
So stinking much. I'm going to have to think about that and incorporate that into my life. That's just.
It's a beautiful thing, my friend.
It is. You are so smart. Yes.
So are you.
I love it. I love us.
Me too. We're so good to go. Oops, so listen to us. We're awesome. I'm knocking microphones around. Okay. Okay, where were we?
Let's see. Oh, Belle of Amherst is talking about the book, The 4 Agreements, and says it's beside my bed and looked at regularly. It's wonderful.
Right on.
Yeah, that is a great book.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, oh, wow. Okay. This is a good one that Anne brought up. You didn't do the one about the ex-narc mom, right?
I did not.
Okay. She says, Anne says, my ex's narcissist mother passed, or my ex-narcissist's mother passed. Okay. She says, I called to wish him condolences. For just a moment, I thought I could go back. She said, you forget what it was like when you're in recovery, just sharing. She's right. And it's easy. We talked about this last week a little bit about abuse amnesia, right? And, but I understand why you called, Anne, and I'm not going to degrade you or tear you down for it. But for other people in that situation, I think if you want to do anything, maybe a card would be more appropriate than a call. But really, and again, when you're with somebody for 50 years or 10 years or even 5 years and you're close to their parent, then it can be a gray area. But I think that you have to remember that when someone is in mourning, a narcissist, especially about a parent or some other form of supply, not only are they in attention seeking mode, which sounds horrible, but it's true, but they also are more vulnerable than usual. And they tend to sometimes, in my experience, have like moments of clarity where they almost act like a normal person a little bit. But if you look really close, you can still see those tendencies. And so I think you're smart that you didn't go back, because she said very brief moment. But you're right. You're right. You forget what it was like when you're in recovery. And that's exactly why I say to people, write down while you're still in the heat of the moment, if you can, or as soon as you know to do it, write down all the reasons you don't want to go back. Because in those moments of weakness, again, your empath self wanted to embrace him, and that's understandable, and knew his mother and felt his pain. And I get all of that, but you're right not to go back. And so I suggest to everyone, and that's also why I did a video like I did yesterday, right? Did the 78 gaslighting stories from survivors, because they're all brief and quick, but they definitely help you go, oh crap, I was in the middle of that, and it reminds you. So Dana, I would love to hear your thoughts for Anne on that one.
I think you nailed it. The only thing I would have to add to that is sometimes, when people reopen contact, it's very common that they're like, man, I can't believe I did that, or what was I thinking, or that was a mistake. And then they feel like they're really back at square one again, and they just get really down on themselves. And I think sometimes the lesson that we can squeeze out of that experience is that pain that we feel when we do reopen contact is like, oh, that's right. Like, this really is painful. And sometimes we need that pain for that reminder to be like, yeah, I can't do this. And it's something, it's like we were talking, this whole episode, just change is a difficult process. And sometimes we have to kind of go around that mountain a few times before we realize, yeah, I can't, it's like, I cannot eat green eggs and ham. Like, I cannot contact a narcissist in a van. I cannot contact them on a boat or in a moat. I cannot, it just doesn't matter what's going on. Like, I cannot contact this person. Like, it's just not going to work. And it just takes a normal, decent person a little, a few times thinking like, well, maybe under these different circumstances, they'll be okay.
Yeah.
And then we find out, oh no, they're not. This is really toxic for me. Like, I can't have this person in my life in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And I totally recommend going all Dr. Seuss on their behinds if you need to, because I love that. I'm just going to say that. Okay. That was great, Dana. Was that just off the top of your head?
Yes.
That was great. I'm sorry. Thanks. I didn't mean to laugh, because it's a totally legitimate point that you were making, but it just struck me. Okay. I'm serious now. We're moving on.
Yes.
Okay. That was too cute. Okay, moving on. All right. This is interesting from Mickey. I just bit my tongue. She says, this sounds extreme, but I'm moving countries to get away from the narcissist. She said, I feel like it's the only way to move forward. I'm moving to the USA. Hey.
Yeah.
Hey, Mickey. She says, hopefully it will be a fresh start. Hey, nothing wrong with that. If you can do it, girl. Plus, it's all right over here, depending on where you live.
Yeah.
That's great. Thoughts on that, Dana?
I moved. It was just kind of one of those serendipitous type events where like I'd had a move planned, and then like everything happened. And so I live 26 hours away from both of my exes, and it's so nice. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I don't have to worry about hearing about them, running into them, like any of that. And if it's possible for you to move, I'd highly recommend it. It's amazing the stress that you realize that you were living under just by being in the same town.
Yeah. But I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was lucky. I moved towns away from my ex, but he moved states away from me after that. And that was okay with me.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's
I was
nice
totally good.
to have that. The only thing I would, I guess kind of take into consideration, Mickey, as I've seen a few of your posts on here, and it sounds like you've been really struggling with having a hard time. She mentions, I can't get myself out of bed each morning. Getting out of bed is a massive achievement for me. She was saying that she's been going to my 3-hour live streams when she was feeling suicidal, and that's been kind of helping her go through. Everything that you're feeling is often very normal. I experienced the exact same stuff. I would just encourage you to prepare yourself emotionally if you're moving to another country. You know, do you have people over here? And if you don't, because it's going to be everything. One of the things when I moved and then my whole life fell apart, it was so overwhelming because I'm just sitting here. I'm like, I don't know where anything is. I don't know anybody. I'm like 6 hours away from a person I can even get a hug from. I don't know where the grocery store is. I was so overwhelmed with everything that I had to learn and how to navigate my new environment, plus try to heal from all this. So I would encourage you to kind of prepare yourself emotionally for that. And meetup.com is fantastic. I would encourage you to join like 20 or so different groups in that area and really kind of fill up your schedule as much as possible so you can really start building up a support system in your new city if you don't already have one.
Yes. Very good points. Yeah. And there are, I am not one of the people, but I know people in my life who have moved from one country to another or gone for a period of time, like a long period of time, you know, a year or 2 years or whatever. And there are like culture shocks that you might not expect and lots of other things like that. So definitely also, especially if you don't have anyone here, do your research and please do take Dana's advice. She's totally on point with that. And I want to thank you for noticing that, Dana. That was really important. Yeah.
And she's saying that she has a good friend here.
Good.
And some new colleagues. So there are some people.
Oh,
good deal. Well, I think Angie and I are both on the same page. We just wish you all the best in this exciting new chapter in your life.
Yes.
And you'll have to keep us posted.
Please do. Please keep us posted. Let us know when you get here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Now, you know, we were talking earlier about the, now, if you have one for us, let me stop because I've been yakking my head off with this.
No, go for it. I'm still looking. I just wanted to make sure I got Mickey's.
Okay. Still Prill kind of touched again on something that I mentioned earlier, where I talked about people who, you know, when someone goes through abuse and then they grow up and they abuse their own children in the same way. And she says, both of my parents were abused and in turn they abused me. She says, it's a struggle for me not to do what they did, but I do it. I fight to be a good mom. Why couldn't they fight to be good parents? And Still Pearl, I can totally relate to that. What I would say to you is this. You are seeing your children as people and individuals. Your parents may not have had that insight. They may have just seen you as an extension of themselves and just have done what they were taught to do. I'm not saying it makes them horrible people, but I agree with Dana's idea that perhaps they are personality disordered after that abuse. The difference is you're choosing to be aware and choosing to give your child a different life. And so therefore you're breaking the cycle in your family. So you're doing something much bigger than just raising one child or two children or whatever. You are changing the path of your family in history from here forward, you know, or whatever you call it when it's not history yet, but it's going to be.
Like lineage?
I mean? Yeah. You're changing things and that is beautiful. And I want you to be proud of yourself for that and do not dwell on what should have been. You can't change what happened in the past. Just move forward with this enlightenment and continue to fight to be a good mom if you need to. But eventually I want you to flow. We'll get to that another day though. Dana, thoughts?
Yeah. And I think that's the difference. And that's what feels so infuriating and invalidating is when other people will say, oh, well, you know, your parents, they did the best they could. And it's like, no, actually, that's the problem. They didn't. They did what was easiest for them. And that was to treat us like garbage.
Yeah.
And you know, yeah. And so it's interesting how then there's that certain level of awareness, like, you know, she has that awareness now of like, you know what? Yeah, this is how we were raised, but I don't agree with this. Like, I'm going to do something very different because I didn't like the way that this was done to me. And I don't know. It would be really cool if psychology at some point can figure out why that is, why you could even have siblings that both grew up in an abusive home, twin siblings even, that grew up in an abusive home. And then one grows up and becomes abusive. The other one grows up and doesn't marry an abusive person. And then they're like, no way. And what's interesting is both of those children's responses are going to be, I'm this way because I grew up in an abusive home.
So true. So true. That's very astute. Absolutely.
And like, what is that? Is it, you know, if we had these conversations earlier about like how to process our emotions, or talking about kind of developing resiliency, or questioning the like software that's kind of installed in us by our parents.
Yeah.
Would that help people kind of change course earlier? Or, you know, what?
I think it has to do, I mean, as far as growing up with the abusive situation, it is what it is. We can't change it in the past, but as far as changing in the future, I think the one thing I would say to everyone who is a current parent or who will be a parent someday and has children who are still children, teach them empathy. You know, do your research, find out what you need to do based on the child's age. Different kids, you know, little tiny children, it's a lot different and a lot simpler to start with. But even up to teenagers, if you make the concerted effort and you push it and you are willing to dig into therapy and all this other stuff, teach them empathy, show them what it feels like to think about what other people feel, because that, I think, is the biggest, unifying factor of toxic people in general. But I don't know if I just went off track there or not. Anyway, moving on. Where did you have something? I'm sorry. Did you have something else to add to that?
I think empathy and accountability.
Yes.
You know, having consequences is important, and consequences like tempered with compassion. I think some parents have consequences, but if there's not that bond there, then the child just feels picked on and bullied and abused. But if they're I don't know, I think spending time with your kids, it really does go a long way to go out for a walk or a soda with your child and just figure out like what's going, like sincerely, like I care about you, like what's going on in your life and who are you hanging out with and what are your hobbies and what's your favorite class and what's your least favorite class, and really getting to know them. And it's that human connection. And I think that's where empathy is truly formed. And once they know that you care, then they're going to be more receptive to other things that you have to say. And also, I think, you know, leading by example, and people don't talk about this kind of stuff, right? Like issues at work, and okay, this is how I handled it, and being assertive. And it's these little things all the time. Like kids are just sponges. Yeah. And they just observe every single thing that you do. And I remember when I was working, I used to work at a few different group homes with kids it was like an alternative to juvenile hall. And my goodness, talk about being hyper aware of your own behavior. Cause I'm like, I do not want them to pick up anything negative that I might be doing.
Yeah.
You know, and so just being aware that they're watching you, like, how do you handle this?
That's a great point.
You know, and
that's true. I have kids.
Yeah.
True. And yeah, it's very interesting to watch them, you know, like I'm not even going to go into it, but it's interesting. Yeah. And so in addition, I can't even add to that. That's absolutely 100% on point with show them how to behave. That's the truth. But also do teach empathy, do teach accountability. Yes. Important. Show it to them as well. Show them. That's so on point. On point. Okay. Yeah. Very good.
Here's a question from Anne again, who says, is it normal for an empath to want my ex to be happy? I feel like it's my fault that he isn't.
Say that again. I was reading another question.
Sure. She said, is this Anne? And she says, is it normal for an empath to want my ex to be happy? Like, I feel like it's my fault that he isn't.
Yeah, I mean, is it normal? Maybe, but it's totally, you just said that it was your ex. So, so I'm going to tell you to stop thinking about his happiness entirely and start focusing on your own. I think the part of it is maybe that when you were in that relationship, your own happiness may have depended upon his, but it doesn't anymore, my friend. Now you get to decide what makes you happy. And I would say, go do that. Go decide what it is that just, like Dana was saying, nourishes your soul. Decide what it is that like gets you going. You know, what makes you excited? Do some of that. What makes you feel peaceful and happy and zippy and buzzy and awesome? Do that, you know, and I'm using made up words just for you to tell you. So, and I'm not trying to be funny. I'm real. This is legitimate. You know, if there's something that makes you wake up in the morning and you would listen, if you would wake up in the morning and go do something like well, hold on, let me roll back. So say tomorrow morning you wake up and life is suddenly perfect. You have enough money. You never have to buy anything again because you're totally loaded and you're living in this perfect world. What would you be waking up to? Who would be in the world? What kinds of things would you do? What would you do every day if you didn't have to worry about money? Ask yourself that question and be real about it. What would you do? Would you write? Would you jump on a trampoline? What would you do? And then start doing that every day. You know, that's start focusing on your happiness now, because I'm guessing if you're worried about his, you haven't thought about yours enough yet. Just a personal opinion. Thoughts, Dana?
I think that's so spot on. And I think so many of us that consider ourselves empaths or more empathic, we are so used to focusing on the emotional needs of other people. We're just so in tune with their wants and needs and like the kind of how to navigate that environment. And like Angie said, you know, if your happiness has been contingent upon his happiness for all of these years, we get so out of tune with our own wants and needs and feelings.
Yes.
And it is time to start focusing on you, because what's done is done. Regardless of if you feel it's your fault or not your fault, he's your ex. And there's nothing that you can do now to try to make him happy. That would just be probably unwanted and seen as manipulative by him and a waste of time on your end, right? So like, feel how you feel, move through those feelings, but then I'd, triple up on kind of rediscovering you, focusing on you.
Redirect your energy to yourself. It feels foreign to you, but it can be done and it can be a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Yep.
Good stuff. Yeah. Dana, we're totally way over time. I did not realize. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Do you want to pick one more and I'll pick one more and then we'll wrap it up?
Sure.
Okay. You got one?
Let me see. I'm going to start looking.
All right. Oh, interesting. Let's see. Oh, interesting. Okay. Belle says, I'll just bust one out since you're still looking. Belle says, we didn't talk about the child who didn't speak till they were 4, did we?
No.
No. Okay. Belle says, is there a question between a child who spoke not a word until age 4, obviously grew up in a highly abusive home, his dad abused him, his mother, and this child being highly abusive now as an adult, I guess, generous, but has no empathy or compassion? I mean, I feel like you just answered your own question a little bit, but I think certainly it sounds like, just from the description, I feel like a little bit like maybe an altruistic narcissist, but maybe even more than that, because abuse that causes a child not to speak a word until age 4 is horrific, usually, in my experience, from what I have seen, from what I have dealt with. So I would say, of course, he's going to be highly abusive if he hasn't worked through that. If he is without empathy and compassion. Clearly we're not diagnosing anyone ever, but it sounds to me, based on what you said, my opinion is you're probably dealing with a pretty toxic person, a pretty toxic narcissist, or worse. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think there's a connection. And I would say altruistic narcissist just without knowing any other information. Dana, thoughts on that one?
Yeah. I mean, that early connection between a child and like their primary caregiver is so key. Even if there's not abuse present, if that bond, that initial attachment's not there, a child is going to have major issues down the road. It's reactive attachment disorder, RAD, is really common in children like that. And that diagnosis tends to kind of be the precursor to antisocial personality disorder when children turn into adults, because they don't have empathy, they don't attach to others. There's just not that sense of connection. And they often have a big axe to grind, and they're really angry because they've been traumatized their whole life and they don't know how to handle emotions appropriately, and they lash out. And as they're learning how to get their needs met, they're learning how to get their needs met in like very maladaptive ways. So they don't have any understanding of like what healthy behavior is. And even if they do, it's generally seen as this is not safe. I can't be healthy in a really toxic environment because that's going to make me vulnerable. And so that child has so many walls up. And then as they get older and they become an adult, watch out, because and that's where we were talking about before, like you can't turn a porcupine into a kitten. If an adult has an attachment disorder that started in childhood, we don't even need to figure out if they have an attachment disorder. If they are not able to effectively bond in a meaningful way to other people, and you're picking up on that, they lack empathy, they lack compassion, they lack concern, they're manipulative, they're pathological liars, that kind of stuff. That's all signs of this person doesn't give two hoots. And this is a porcupine. And it's tragic. It's like a rabid puppy, right? Yeah. It's freaking tragic. Like that puppy is rabid. Like you can't snuggle with it. It's cute and it's cuddly and you really want to. Your love is not going to change that rabid puppy.
Great point. So, yeah. It's hard to admit. It's hard to even acknowledge that.
It is.
But it's totally on point. Totally true.
We just don't have that kind of power. I mean, I wish I did. Yeah. Like I wish I could go around and just hug people and squeeze all their broken pieces together, but it just doesn't work that way. And that journey for them to tear down all those walls and then rebuild healthy boundaries and learn to be assertive and connect to others and all of that. I mean, that's a lifelong process for a person to go through if they're even willing to want to go through that. And most people that have those maladaptive behaviors aren't.
Yes. So. Absolutely. Excellent point. Yes, indeed. Okay. Do you have a last one for us?
Oh, I did. And then I lost it. I hit my screen and my cursor moved.
I hate when it does that.
Yes, I do too. Let's see. Okay. We'll go with this one. This is from Miss Lee, who says, should I talk to my sister who our relationship is strained due to my narcissistic mother?
I mean, should you talk to her? I think that it's a good idea to attempt to talk to her, but I recommend that you go into a bunch of details with her. I would say don't start with any details. I mean, I would say let's have a cup of coffee and I'd feel her out and see how she's feeling about the situation. Again, without knowing exactly what it is between you, is she playing you against each other? Has she put one of you in the scapegoat, one in the golden child role? Talk about the dynamic of the situation, or just talk about, hey, remember when we were sisters and it was cool, and then take it from there. I don't think it's a bad idea unless you know for sure she's toxic, in which case you would treat her like any other narcissist. And Dana, what do you think?
Yeah. And I think a thing that's common for a lot of people is once they realize like, oh, narcissism, this is a thing. And oh my goodness, this describes mom to a T, and that they want to go tell all their other siblings. Like, you guys, I have it all figured out. Like, this explains our childhood. Right. And then they go and they talk to other siblings, and the siblings they're like, it's that normal person response, right? Of like, no, mom is not a narcissist. She bought you flowers for Valentine's Day. She's not a narcissist, or, she wasn't all that bad, or her mother was even worse. And it's just all kinds of like justification and invalidation. And then
psychology. Yeah.
Yeah. And people they lock horns. because they really want their siblings to validate them and to realize, no, you guys, seriously, remember how abusive mom was? Like, that's not normal. And the other siblings just minimize it. That was a long time ago. You know, she didn't know any better. Like, you were really a difficult child, all kinds of stuff. And so if that's what you're encountering, then if you do talk to your sister, preparing yourself ahead of time is she's not open to this.
Yeah.
And so to continue coming at her, talking about narcissism and abuse and all this, it's just going to make her defensive and angry, and it's going to make you feel invalidated and frustrated. And
Exactly.
so, yeah, so you're probably better off talking about everything else, anything else in your life other than the elephant in the room, and to just steer clear of that conversation, even if she starts trying to kind of open the door about that. If it's coming from a place of like she's looking for a fight, I would you got to jump out of that bull's way, because it's just not going to end well. And you could say something like, we've had this conversation before. And depending on what your dynamic is with your sister, like, I really don't want to ruin our relationship. I've got some pretty strong opinions about our childhood. I know that you remember things differently, and I think we should just talk about something else. Or we need to be able to be at the level where we can just change the topic and, I don't want to leave in anger or with a bunch of resentment or hurt feelings. Like, I love you. I want you to be in my life, and we need to just navigate middle ground.
Yeah. Excellent points. And as I'm reading through these comments to try, I'm seeing so many more great questions, and I wish I had all day. And I know Dana wishes she did too.
Yeah.
But please make sure that you guys come back and you see us next week on Dana's channel at the same bat time, that bat channel. Sorry. And also so Thrive After Abuse on Facebook, Thrive After Abuse on YouTube, thriveafterabuse.com. And I'll make sure to put all that in there. And somebody was mentioning in the chat, Dana, that they really got some good help from one of your books.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Did you already release your journal, by the way?
I did.
Okay, good, because I wanted to make sure it was yours before I mentioned it. They said Start Here really helped them. And what was the name of your journal? Tell me again.
There's two versions of it. It's called the Insight Journal.
That was the one.
3-year version or a 1-year version. Okay.
I don't know which one they had, but I will link to those in this description before I upload the video officially to my channel. But I mean, it's already on there for those of you who are subscribed, but for everybody else. But also just go to, are you under Dana Morning? You are under Dana Morningstar on
Facebook,
Amazon.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So go search Dana Morningstar on Amazon if you want to get them faster and sooner. I did not mean to like totally cut you off. I just, I'm sorry. You were making some excellent points. I got all distracted by, I have to go to the bathroom.
No, you're fine. We're totally over on time. I really enjoy our discussions and your input, and our community is just, it's so fun to see people to run into them around the internet.
Yes, I totally agree.
Get so tickled by that. It's so cool. So
love it.
Yes. So thank you guys.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Dana. We really need to make plans to do that movie night or something.
Dude, we totally do.
We do.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Everybody, hugs and love. Belle says thank you. Everybody says thank you. Okay, I will come back and thank you, Jen Archer. I will come back and thanks to everybody and read the chat after this. And Dana, you should be able to if you have time. But thanks everybody. Hugs and love.
Yes.
All right. Eventually I'm going to cross off of this. Here we go. Okay.